Okay, welcome everyone to Tanya Outside In. We are finishing our summary up to chapter 32 because we're actually holding at chapter 32. So our summary is going to be today from chapter 26 to 32, which makes a lot of sense. If you're going to divide Sefer Tanya at one point, you would divide it at chapter 26. Between chapter 25 and 26, that is a very intelligent place to split the Sefer in half. Up to chapter 26, Lo Ad Bichlal. From chapter 1 to 25, we basically get the vocabulary in place. We understand by putting the logistics together, we understand where we fit in, how well we don't actually understand where we fit in. We understand what we're doing here. And remember, it's very important. Remember that Tanya talks about the Tzaddik Benoni in Russia. The way I understand it after after having gone through the Tanya a few times is that the Rebbe used that as a kind of springboard into explaining reality. The concept of Tzaddik Benoni in Russia is not like unto itself, it's not particularly, I don't think that's what it's about. He used that as a way to describe everything. What are we here to do? What happens when we do it? What happens when we don't do it, etc. So until chapter 25, the Rebbe was basically putting all these pieces together, and we came out with a very good idea, basically, of what we're made of and what we need to do. That finishes by chapter 25. Chapter 26, now he begins to discuss specific issues that will prevent us from doing what we need to do. So it moves some people. I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was with Moshe Wolfson's at Sal, who used to tell people to start learning the Sefer from chapter 26, because that's when it kind of becomes like very like practical. Like I mean, don't,
Forgot, forgot.
yeah, well, I don't understand that, but I know, when Moshe Wolfson was a god also, that's what I heard he said. I don't know if he actually said that, but that's what I heard he said. Um, but
Wait,
it would probably be according to this idea of that at this point begins really practical advice on, although I found other stuff very practical before this, but this is like very specific practical advice on avoidance Hashem. Gabriel, what are you saying?
so basically, we finished the long way and the short way.
Yeah, you can
I
say
know there's a machlokus. There's a machlokus about the one of them is. One of them, there's two different ways of learning it. Which one? Long way and short.
I don't know, but I'll tell you, the more I've learned it, I know that everyone breaks it down into the long way and the short way and that thing, and I understand that 100%, I think, anyway. I don't see it as two separate things, to be honest. The deeper I've gone in, they're not like it's this or that. And it's not even they like run, or you can do this and that at the same time, which obviously people would say. I don't see them as something different when you get down to the real foundation of it all. Anyway. Okay, chapter 26, the Rebbe highlights the most common problem to avoid Hashem, which is a lack of simcha or depression, atzvus. Okay, chapter 26 um, outlines two reasons for where depression comes from. And remember, in Tanya, depression is not well, depression isn't actually an emotion. Depression means, according to what I've understood from my Rebbe, depression means an inability to experience emotion, an inavailability. Is that a word? I just make that up. Being unavailable to emotion. That's what Atzvus is. And it's very important to remember that in Tanya, Kavanas a mitzvah, yeah, Kavanas a mitzvah in Tanya is talking about the motivation for the mitzvah. It's not talking about it's not talking about the intention that you're having, like, like the Kavanah Zari, where you're working out with the Sheamus and you're making sure that this sphere connects with this sphere and v'chule, yeah? That's like, and the idea of Kavanah is just you're thinking, you're really concentrating on the words. That is not what the Tanya means by Kavanah, the way I understand it. The way I understand it, the concept of kavana in the Tanya is talking about your motivation to do the mitzvah. Is your motivation from Atzilus, where basically it's God doing the mitzvah through you, like the Avos and like Moshe and Aaron and Yosef Dod v'chulei, and the Tanoim? Or is your love for God, is your kavana a very, very intense love that you've generated using your own mind? Yeah, that would be a very high form of love, like the tzaddikim in our generation, in our world. Or maybe it's not as intense as that, but you're still connected to the innate love that the soul has by way of the fact that it's just a Jewish soul. Yeah, that's a less intense love, but it's still intense. But again, it's the motivation. Or maybe it's mitzvahs and nashim u'lamada, and that's lo lishma. That means there's no kavana there. There's no motivation. Like, why are you davening shacharis? I don't know. That's what I do. Yeah. Well, where's the motivation? There is no, you're not being motivated. You're passively running a script. There's no motivation. It's just a script. And then there's obviously for negative reasons, which would be lo lishma mamash, negative kavanas. So kavanas mitzvah means emotion. It's the emotion that moves you. So obviously, according to Tanya, the biggest problem is going to be lack of simcha or atzvus, because then where's the divine service going to be generated from? If you've got no emotional energy, then the divine service is going to be coming from where? If there's no divine energy, if there's no energy, if there's no like energy from you, like holy energy motivating the mitzvah, which is always emotion, then it's going to be coming from Sitra Achra. That energy to do the mitzvah will be either mitzvah sanashim ulamada, where it doesn't go to klipa mamash.
That's Sitra Achra.
Well, it doesn't go to klipa, but Liois Talmud Chochem goes to klipas noiga. Yeah, Lakanta goes to klipas tameas. But if you don't have any emotion to serve the bonus shalom, then it's going to be the what's going to be generating the desire to do mitzvahs will be self gain, self attainment, Liois Talmud Chochem, whatever it is, the negative thing. So in the philosophy of Tanya, it's absolutely essential to go beyond depression. Maybe in certain ways of understanding Yiddishkeit where they don't put a dagesh on avoid lishma, yeah, maybe it wouldn't be such a big problem to not be besimcha. Because why? Who cares? You're doing it for Shon Binyamin. You're doing it for Olam Haba. You're doing it for Leo's Talmud Chochem. So what? You're doing the mitzvah. That's great. So, but by the Rebbe, that's not acceptable. By the Alter Rebbe, and therefore the biggest ikuv that he speaks about, the first thing he talks about is simcha, not having simcha. So Perek Kavav outlines two possible reasons why you won't be simcha. Number one is because life isn't going good for you. Yeah, bayot with um chayai, banai, umazonai. Yeah, my health, my kids, and my panasa. Yeah, real problems, real problems. Yeah, that's one reason for depression. The other reason is that you've done Averas. Okay, like you've mamish. So one is it's happening to me, and the other is I did it. Those are two apparently valid reasons to be depressed. And the Rebbe says no. By it's happening to you, remember, Gams and Tova, everything's for the good, and the Avodah Shalom is. It might not look great. It might be very painful. It might be extremely painful. It might be intolerably painful, but it's still for the best. I don't know how, and maybe we never will know how. Although I do feel that most people end up when they get through very hard things, they're grateful that they went through it. Basically, most times when they get through it. But either way, the whether you do realize or you don't realize, the Rebbe says if you care about reality and getting closer to reality, then the fact that it's hard is even in some ways Hashem dealing with you in a higher on a higher level, and it's really very it's actually really very good. Okay, that's a in short how to deal with things that aren't going your way. What about the Averas that you've done? That sounds like it is right to have a little bit of depression about that. So he says, kind of, meaning you shouldn't get depressed, but you should feel bitter. You should have Mariva Salev, a bitter, your heart should feel a little bit bitter. And but that needs to be taken. You need to take a time out to do that. Why? Because you're not thinking about how it's not just about how you screwed up. Real tshuva is against whom you screwed up. That's real tshuva. It's not I messed up. It's Hashem deserves so much more from me. That's real tshuva, and that doesn't. Those kinds of thoughts don't just pop into your head. Yeah, to really get clarity on on your on your um on your obligation in this world, like the Ramchal says, takes a time out. So that's what he says. So the fact that you're thinking bad about yourself because you've been doing stuff wrong, if it just comes upon you in the day, yeah, then get rid of those thoughts. They're not, they are there, he says they're there just to drag you deeper into Taiva. They're just there because you know that the worst stuff you do is always when you're down. Yeah, that's when the guard is down. Everyone does the worst stuff when they're down. Everyone, without exception. Yeah, so that's what he said. It's just the Yates are trying to bring you down and to stomp on you a little bit more. So don't let that happen. Okay, now we get to chapter 27, which in my mind is really the heart of Tanya. I know chapter Lamed Beis they call the heart of Tanya, which obviously it is. But chapter 27 is actually the middle peric when because you got 53 prakim. One moment. You've got 53 chapters, so you've got 26 and 26. And then in the middle, you've got chapter 27. So in my mind, it really is the central Tanya. When you understand it deeply, you'll realize it's very clear. Chapter 27 gives you another reason why you might get depressed. It's not that it's happening to you. It's not that you did it. It's that you are it. You are Ra. That's what he says. How do you know you're Ra? Well, how do you know there's Ra in you? Is because you keep having these dirty thoughts. You keep thinking these filthy thoughts. Yeah, you push them away because you're a Beinoini. You're a Beinoini. So you never entertain the thoughts, but you have these thoughts. The Tzaddikim don't have these thoughts by definition. And if they do have these thoughts, by the way, it's because of people like you and me. that's the Tzadikim's bad thoughts come from other people. They don't come from their own self. So they wouldn't get down about it anyway, because it's not about them. They might be upset for the other guy. But by us, where the thoughts are popping up from our own heart, yeah, that shows you that you're not doing that great. You're basically, I mean, look, only Rishoyim have things like that in their heart. Yeah. So the Rebbe says you can't get depressed over that. Why? Because it's just coming from arrogance. You think that you should be a tzaddik, yeah, but you're Benoni. That is the definition, and this is why I think this is the core of Tanya. This is the definition of the Benoni, a man who has bad thoughts, who he pushes them away. That is the avoider, ikka avoider of the Benoni. you have bad thoughts and you don't entertain them. That's an amazing. That's amazing. That's chapter Kav Zion. That is an amazing. That's that's really amazing to understand it like that. That the very heart of Tanya, the very middle parak of Tanya, basically tells you, and he does it in a kind of in a subtle way, but basically tells you that this is the avoider of the Benoni is on the level of machshava. Okay. And then he talks about this is kind of like tangentially, but it's very much on topic, but it you'll see because it goes on. Either way, so the next chapter, chapter 28, is primarily about um not being able to concentrate when you're davening. That when you're davening, you're having distracting thoughts. Love dafka evil thoughts. In fact not he doesn't talk about evil thoughts, I don't think. He talks about machshavas zaros, not machshavas ros. Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking not about dirty, disgusting thoughts. We're talking about random thoughts. You're davening, and then all of a sudden you're thinking about this trip to India that I'm planning, and then you realize you're in Sim Shalom, and it's like driving home after Shabbos somewhere, and all of a sudden you're like home. You're like Sim Shalom. Wow. Okay. And then what you start to do is you start hoping that you didn't bow when you bowed by Avos, you didn't erroneously say Moedim and then just jump straight to Sim Shalom. And that's in the back of your head thinking maybe I skipped the entire Shemona Esrei and I went straight to the end, and you feel so stupid because whatever. Everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about, unfortunately. So this avoider of the or this the answer that he gives in to daven properly is don't pay attention to the thoughts and keep moving, keep going. Okay, don't get distracted. It's like a filthy guy trying to talk to you, and he says a misnabel in a misnabel in a manuvel misnabel. Yeah, somebody who wrestles with someone who's filthy is going to get really filthy, even more filthy. So he says, don't try and lift up the thought like whatever there might be an idea to do. He says just keep moving. He said what's doing is actually you're doing really well because the fact is you're davening geschmack, and because you've got a nefesh Bahamis who's getting a little bit anxious because you're davening so nicely, yeah, then he does that to you. And that's basically the eighth of Kaf Ches. Okay. And then we get to Kaf Tes 29, which is now the um the this is the most profound and most probably common problem with a Benoni. Now remember, yeah, a Benoni is a man or a woman who never does any avail in thought, speech, and action. He never entertains a bad thought, he never speaks Lashon Hara, and he never does anything wrong, and he never misses the chance to do a mitzvah. For all intents and purposes, that is a serious yid, yeah? That's a serious guy. So what can happen, and I only realized this not so long ago, and then what Rav Manis taught me 20 years ago made sense, which happens a lot of the time. That the Benoni can become the way Rav Manis, the word Rav Manis used was smug. Yeah, you can use there's also you could use the word complacent, but what I want to try and describe the mechanics of what happens in chapter 29 is that the Benoni becomes identified with his Madrega. That's called being smug. And it's very, very hard not to be. It's very hard to generate. Like there's a famous saying, if you're the cleverest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. Yeah. Now, this Benoni, he is a, everybody calls him a tzaddik. He's he he doesn't do any aveiros and he only does mitzvahs. So everyone's calling him a tzaddik. And now what happens is the guy can become, if he's not 100% on the game, the guy can become identified with his tzidkus, with his righteousness, and then he becomes smug. And then he becomes metumtum. His lave, he ends up with timtum alave. Yeah, being identified with X is in a sense becoming more defined. Like you've got a wall around you. You've spoken about the egoic wall. Yeah, that's why it's called timtum alave, the hardness of the heart. The blood. It's called a lave ke'evan. The heart becomes hard like a stone. That is miramas to the hardening of the egoic shell, and that takes place because of identifications. The more identified with X, Y, and Z you are, and the more things you're identified with, yeah, the more unavailable to emotion you become, the more egoic you become, the more, or I should say, just the less you become. You become less. It's so ironic because the it's a little bit like I heard someone say one time that there's women out there, not all women, but there are women out there who are desperate to be loved and honored. Yeah. And in their pursuit of love and honor or love and praise, they become very, how do you say, promiscuous. That what they're trying to secure with their promiscuity is exactly the thing that their promiscuity will utterly block them from. You with me? Like there's women out there who are very loose, let's say, very open, yeah? And that's always coming from a place of wanting love and wanting honor or praise or whatever it is, even wanting connection. And it does the exact opposite. So too with the ego. The ego wants to be more. Yeah, as we've learned over and over. That's the MO of the ego. Yeah, all it wants to be is more. But what it does, everything it does makes it become less and less. That's the amazing thing. As the ego gets stronger, the person becomes less and less real. So it's an ironic, it's ultimately ironic. But the point is here that the concept of the ego trying to solidify itself, that's what happens to this Benoni in chapter 29. And he becomes smug and he becomes unavailable to pushing himself in things that are permissible and in davening. That we're not going to get too much into that right now, but that's what happens. When a person becomes egoic, those two things fall away. His lifnim mishus adin avoida goes away, yeah, and his ability to daven goes away. So how does he get that back? How does he get back to being normal? And then at this point, the Rebbe goes on a kind of a rant, a tirade against this person. And basically, it's like a character assassination. He's basically saying to this Benoni, you think you're mamash the what do you call it? You're the spit.
Hashem's gift.
Cat's meow.
Yeah, exactly. You think you're the man? No, you're really not. Really think about it. And then he goes down, and I know that I never heard the Rebbe Rebbe says, but I think in the name, I heard Rev Shais Taub say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that chapter 29 is one of those chapters that you get through quickly. Okay, it's not so applicable to us nowadays, if I remember correctly. But basically, he talks about inducing your own state of disidentification, which, as we know, is called Shvir Salev. If you think you're the man, put it this way, I'll make it personal to me. It's not really anymore, but anyway, let's say I was the best photographer, yeah? That was my identity. And comes along Shlomi Klein, who is an objectively better photographer than me. Well, now I'm not the best photographer. I thought I was the best photographer, but I'm not anymore. That's called Shvir Salev. That's really a hard place to go to. It's actually a very soft place to go to because the hardness got broken, but it's a very hard place to be in. Yeah. That's when you don't have any identity left. And the Rebbe says, basically, you think you're the man? Let's talk about this. And he shows you how you're not the man, how you think you're so great. Look at your dreams. Look at the things that happen in your dreams, yeah? Where you don't have the ability to, because thinking wise, you never have bad thoughts because you push them away. You never entertain bad thoughts. But look at what you dream about. Yeah, that's not great. Yeah, and then look about, think about all the stuff you did when you were a kid. Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, and think about all the times you miss these, the opportunity to do this, or you don't push yourself for this, etc., etc. Yeah, and by the end of chapter 29, you're like you go down and down and down and down and down, and then that's basically at the end of chapter 29 when you're kind of you've been schmeiced. You're really in no man's land by the end of chapter 29. Then he launches into chapter 30. Chapter 30 begins with the words have a shuffle ruach bifnei kol ha'adam. You should see yourself as lower than every man. In truth, bifnei kol ha'adam mamash, every man mamash, Yidden, regular human beings, afilu bifnei kal shebakalim. Even the kal shebakalim, you should see yourself as lower than them. Even that guy who's really, really bad, you should see yourself as lower than him. Well, how do you do that? And the Rebbe says, well, just think of it this way. If you got given his peckle, you had his parents, you grew up in his neighborhood, you grew up with his socio-economical, matzav, yeah, you think you'd be any better than him? Probably be worse. If you didn't have the intelligence that you have, you didn't have the support that you have, the framework that you have, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Where would you be? So you can see yourself. So now it comes out that this is kind of tangentially, but I was talking to my dad about this today. It's really difficult as you go up in Avodas Hashem. It gets harder. There is a point, apparently, that I've heard of, I don't know about personally, where you become a tzaddik, yeah, maybe. And then there's no more struggle left. The struggle goes away because you've become godly, yeah? That's apparently something that can happen, yeah? But as you move further on in your Yiddishkeit, it gets harder and the results become less. Remember the analogy of the sword? One of the most important analogies I know. This is so deep on so many levels. But just to say it very, very quickly, you find an old sword in the mud, yeah? You take a rock, you bang off the hunks of mud, yeah? Very easy. And the difference is now you see there's a sword. Before it's just like a hunk of mud. So it was a very easy task. And the results are huge. Now the next level is you have to now you've banged off the hunks of mud. Now you have to clean off the mud that's clinging to the sword, yeah? Now you need to use hot water and a rag. Now you're going to be exerting yourself more, and the difference isn't as great. And now the next stage is now the sword has got all the mud off it, but it's stained. Yeah, it's got a tarnish on the blade. Now you have to take out the boiling hot water, the bleach, the scouring pad, whatever you call it, the Brillo pad, yeah, and you're doing a away, yeah, huge amount of work, and it's a very small incremental difference than it was before. That is avodas Hashem. The more you work, the harder it gets, the less payrus you see. That sounds really depressing, yeah? But it's tempered with the fact that if you're working harder and moving further, you care less and less about yourself and you just get on with it. So it balances out in that sense. But why does it get harder? It gets harder because your battle becomes more and more subtle. At the beginning, it could be the guy was struggling to keep Shabbos or to stay, to stay faithful to his wife, and he keeps moving. Now Shabbos and fidelity are not a question. Now it's more like biting your nails on Shabbos and a vak lashon hara. But what about a guy? What about a real Beinoini who's gone past all of that? He would never imagine biting his nails on Shabbos. That's Asa, yeah. He would never think of saying something that could even be maybe besuffic could be lashon hara. Well, what's he struggling with now? So he's struggling with avoiders that he makes up himself in a sense. He's struggling with personal avoiders that he hears Hashem speak to him. I need to do this now. I need to do that now. It's not expected of me. No, people might think I'm weird that I'm doing stuff like that. Or people might think I'm big tzaddik that I'm doing these kind of avoiders, yeah? You obviously wouldn't tell anyone. But now those kinds of avoiders are very difficult. You can imagine, yeah, they're very difficult. And it's more difficult because objectively, he's doing really well. So he doesn't kind of like when you find out that biting your nails on Shabbos is asa, yeah? Well, now you've got a good reason to not bite your nails on Shabbos. But if you're doing very, very subtle, intense avoiders at a very high level, and you can't be bothered or you don't feel like it or it's too much right now, yeah? Well, why don't you just drop it? But you realize that you're still making and breaking promises. Even on that level, no matter how beyond the Fnim Sadin you've gone and how unexpected it is of you, not unexpected, not what's the word? How not expected of you it is. How would you say that? It's not unexpected. Whatever. It's definitely not expected of you. So now the person can give in on those high avoiders, and now he's on a slippery spiral down because it's on his level, you realize? And he knows that this is the day, this is the difficulty of the struggle of the Beinoini who's at a higher level is on these madregas. And that's what the Rebbe says in Perek Lamed is when you think about it objectively, how hard are you trying? But I don't know about you. I don't struggle to say Kriya Shema B'zman. That's not one of my struggles. Yeah. Whereas I know that, I know people who their entire fight is Kriya Shema B'zman. And then I know people who that isn't even on their radar. Kriya Shema B'zman isn't even a thing in their head. They might even know there is a Zman. Yeah, for them, their fight is whatever their fight is, yeah? That's what the Rebbe says. Look at the fight. Look at the energy necessary for the fight. And now ask yourself, are you really waging war? Are you all in? So who are you to feel better than this guy? And therefore you should feel lower than this guy. That's kind of the finale of chapter 30 is that. So the finale of these chapters, and then chapter 31 is basically moving us out of depression by beginning to describe the purpose of creation, which is building a Dira B'Tachtonim for the Rebbeinu Shalom, which means Okay, you're not doing great. Yeah, as we've assassinated your character over the past 4 chapters. Yeah, 28, so 29, 30, 29 and 30, they're long chapters. It's 29 is. Um, now let's try and spin it. Let's pivot and let's do the right thing. And the Rebbe says, remember that you've got the schus of serving the Ribono Shel Olam, and that should enable you to move from what's called Meriras Alev, not Shviras Alev. Meriras Alev is bitterness of heart, where your heart is alive but it hurts, into genuine avodas Hashem. And then he takes a kind of a little time out, and he said, by the way, you should know the way that Rav Yoel Khan, that I heard Rav Shais Taub explain Rav Yoel Khan, explain chapter 32, is it goes chapter 29, 30, 31, 33, 34. That's all like one thing. And chapter 32 is a kind of like a little bit of a side point, but it's on topic. Chapter 32 is telling you the fringe benefits, which is much more than a fringe benefit, the fringe benefits of relating to yourself as a neshama, as opposed to a nefesh Bahamis. When you relate to yourself, when you disidentified, like which was the avoider of chapter 29 and 30 and 31, once you've disidentified with your nefesh Bahamis, now you're ready to re-identify with your nefesh Rakis. And what's the benefit that comes from identification with the nefesh Rakis? Ahavas Yisrael. Kol zman you think of yourself as a human being, your love for not just other Jews, but your love for everything is going to be dependent on something. It's going to need that they fulfill some kind of criteria for them to be loved by you. Only once you have ascended from that sense of individual self and egoic isolation, and you have re-identified with the reality of who you are, which is the Ribono Shel Olam, then you will be able to love Yidden as yourself. That's v'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, like the cha, like your kesa, like the spitz of who you are, like the very pneumius of who you are, which is the Ribono Shel Olam. Echad yachid and miyuchad, the yechida, the you and the Ribono Shel Olam are one. At that point, we're all one. And that's what Ahavas Yisrael really is. Ahavas Yisrael is not positive thinking. It's not dam b'chaf schus. It's not Nakuda Tova. That those are other avoiders. They're holy avoiders, yeah. But the avoider of V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha is the avoider of his kashrus. Don't get me wrong. Nakuda Tova and all that kind of stuff can help with this. But the point of it is that you get to a place where you are identified with your nefesh Rakis, where you have I can't think of another way of saying it. Where you have identified with your nefesh Rakis, and that's who you are, and therefore I love you, because there's no separation in me and you. We're just that's it. I'm what I am. That's you as well. I've merged back to that place, the very essence of my Yiddishkeit, which is called the Shechina Kadosha, which is called Knesset Yisrael, which is the makor the shoresh, how say that? Not the root. How say makor? The source of all of the souls. We've gone back to that point, and that's V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, and that's chapter Lamed Beis, and that's why it's called Leiv. Because just remember, we'll finish on this, that when we talk about Keser, which is the very highest, which is the essence of the soul, yeah, we also talk about Umka de Liba, which is the very inner. So it depends which way you look at it. You could talk about the highest place or the most internal place. It's just a different way of looking at the same thing. It's the point of reality, and that's chapter 20, chapter 32, B'ezrat Hashem. And next week we will begin again from chapter Lamed Gimel, B'ezrat Hashem. Okay, shkoyach.
Right. Thank you.
The truth is, this is a total tangent, but the high versus deep is if you're going in the Erechin of Igulim or the Kav.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Colors of everyone.
Shmuel.